So, when you're just lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, and it feels like gravity has suddenly doubled?
Oh, yeah, that crushing weight.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you've just realized you did something genuinely wrong. I mean, maybe it was a harsh word spoken in anger or a broken promise, or even just a massive professional mistake.
Absolutely.
But whatever it is, there's this profound guilt and shame just pressing down on your chest, and you feel entirely isolated in that moment.
Yeah.
Just hoping against hope that this mistake doesn't mean you are, well, fundamentally broken.
That suffocating sensation is so universally recognizable. When you reach that point of profound guilt, your internal landscape just seems to collapse in on itself.
Yeah, it really does.
And your biological instinct is to scramble for a way out of that dark emotional room, but the psychological door feels completely locked from the inside.
Well, today, we're actually looking really closely at the mechanics of that locked door. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're exploring the work of philosopher and psychological researcher, Dr. Thomas Maples.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. He wrote this deeply reflective piece titled Seeds of Mercy, a gift once given, twice received. And our mission today is to figure out how we can actually disarm our harshest inner critics.
Which is no small task.
Right. But we want to see if we can transform that self-condemnation into a catalyst for actual personal growth.
Yeah.
And Maples grounds his entire exploration of guilt in this haiku he wrote, which I just love. It goes like this. Seed of mercy sown, the darkest hour now breaks, full light will guide me.
It sets such a very intentional, almost quiet mood for this material because Maples is attempting this radical reframing of how the human brain processes remorse.
How so?
Well, ordinarily we experience shame purely as a penalty, right? It's just the consequence at the end of a bad action. But he's suggesting something entirely different. He argues that this heavy guilt is actually an invitation. It's an opening for grace.
I mean, I'll be honest, I struggle with viewing shame as an invitation.
Most people do.
Because when you're caught in the middle of a shame spiral, it feels way more like a destructive glitch. It's like a virus in your mental software that just freezes up your executive function.
Right. You just want it gone.
Exactly. You just want to run an antivirus scan, quarantine the feeling, and delete it so you can get back to normal.
And viewing emotional pain as a glitch is such a common modern reflex. But from both a psychological and philosophical standpoint, Maples is saying that guilt is actually the core operating system working exactly by design.
Okay, let's unpack this. Working by design.
Yes. He points out that this capacity for guilt is a uniquely human inheritance. He frames it around the concept of moral knowledge, drawing on that theological idea of the fall from grace.
Right.
The idea is that without that heavy burden of a conscience, the cognitive ability to even feel remorse simply wouldn't exist.
So, meaning without the agonizing alarm bells of shame, we wouldn't have any internal friction to stop us from acting on every destructive impulse.
Exactly. We would be entirely unchecked. The conscience functions as this uncompromising inner judge because it has direct access to your hidden works,
Oh, it knows everything.
Right. It knows the corners you cut when no one was looking, and it knows your true intent behind your actions. So it exposes you to yourself. It shines this glaring spotlight on the massive gap between what you just did and your own internal standards.
Which is brutal. And Maples actually references the Apostle Paul to illustrate this, specifically Romans chapter 2.
Yes. The law written in their hearts.
Exactly. Paul talks about how the demands of the law are written in their hearts and how our conflicting thoughts will either accuse us or defend us. So it's like we don't necessarily need an external rule book or even societal laws to tell us we failed.
No, the standard is totally embedded in our neurobiology.
But I have to ask, why does the brain make the realization of that gap feel so physically and emotionally agonizing? And why does it have to hurt so much?
Because profound discomfort is basically the only mechanism that commands enough attention to prepare the ground for a merciful state. What's fascinating here is that exposure is an absolute prerequisite for growth.
I guess that makes sense.
Right. I mean, you can't fix a foundational crack in a building if you refuse to even acknowledge the basement. And Maples relies on the historical analogy of Michelangelo to illustrate how this conscience operates when it's actually healthy.
Oh, the idea that Michelangelo didn't actually create the statue of David, but merely freed the form he knew was already resting inside the unsculpted marble.
Exactly. The healthy conscience operates in the exact same manner. It perceives your true moral form, like the ideal version of yourself that's just waiting inside the rough stone.
Wow.
So when you do something wrong, the conscience is just chipping away at the discrepancy. It compares your recent failure to the masterpiece you're actually capable of becoming.
Okay, but so if our conscience is just doing its job by showing us our flaws, trying to sculpt us by chipping away the excess stone, why does it so often paralyze us with shame instead of helping us grow?
That's the big question.
Because it seems to me like the chisel frequently turns into a sledgehammer. Instead of shaping the marble, the guilt just smashes the whole block to dust, and then we can't move forward at all. That brings us to what Maples calls the mirror, right?
Yes, that distinction between the chisel and the sledgehammer is exactly where Maples introduces the mirror test. It's an evaluation of your psychological reflection. When you look inward, what do you actually see?
Okay.
If you look in that mirror and see absolute flawless perfection, well, you're dealing with a severe cognitive distortion.
I mean, that sounds like narcissism, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at your own actions and see zero flaws, you have no capacity for growth because you've convinced yourself there's no excess stone left to chip away. You think you're already the masterpiece.
Exactly. But consider the other extreme, which is honestly where a vast majority of people find themselves trapped.
The sledgehammer side.
Right. If you look in the mirror and you see nothing, right? If you just see this ruined, worthless block of marble, you are no longer dealing with a functioning conscience. You are dealing with a hostile inner critic.
And a hostile critic demands a perfect finished state immediately. It totally forgets that the self is a continuous work in progress. It looks at the unpolished stone and just says, "This is garbage, throw it away," instead of recognizing there is simply more work to do.
Yes, and the psychological mechanism at play under a hostile inner critic creates an environment so toxic that healthy, objective self-assessment becomes literally impossible.
Wait, really? Impossible.
Because the core error of this hostility is how it exponentially raises the stakes of failure.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to push back on this material for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If we are supposed to be critical enough to sculpt ourselves, like Michelangelo's David, isn't there a significant risk in practicing what Maples calls self-mercy? Like if I simply tell myself, hey, I'm just a work in progress, doesn't that easily just become a convenient excuse? How do you balance being truly accountable for doing something awful without just letting yourself off the hook?
This raises an important question, and it's actually the most frequent trap people fall into when evaluating the concept of mercy. They equate mercy with apathy or, an avoidance of accountability.
Right, like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. But Maples argues the exact opposite. True, objective accountability is biologically impossible when your inner judge is hostile.
Impossible again. But wouldn't a harsh, punishing judge be the exact thing that forces you to look at your mistakes?
Think about the brain's fight, flight, or freeze response. When the inner judge is hostile, the penalty for making a mistake isn't just a need to apologize. The penalty is the complete destruction of your self-worth.
Oh, wow.
It is a form of psychological ego death. And when the penalty is that catastrophic, your brain will do whatever it takes to survive the threat. It will deploy subconscious defense mechanisms to avoid looking at your actual faults.
So you start deflecting.
Deflecting criticism, blaming your circumstances, or just completely hiding the truth from yourself.
Because the shame makes the truth too dangerous to look at. If admitting I messed up means I have to accept that I am fundamentally worthless, my brain simply won't allow me to admit it. The survival instinct overrides the desire for accountability.
Precisely. By extending divine grace or mercy to yourself, you aren't ignoring your faults. You are simply disarming the psychological hostility.
You're lowering the stakes.
Exactly. You lower the stakes from I am an irredeemable monster to I am a human who made a mistake. Only when you feel safe from your own psychological attacks can you lower your defenses and safely begin the vulnerable work of reconciliation.
So mercy doesn't stop the sculpting process.
Not at all. It provides the psychological safety required to pick up the chisel again without fear of shattering the whole block.
But self-mercy isn't something we're naturally good at. Reaching that place of internal safety requires a massive shift. Maples views this transition as a skill to perfect, not just a destination to attain. Which leads us to how we actually find the light to do this work.
Right, and he turns to the literary world to articulate this shift. Quoting Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, you know the line, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes."
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with the twice blessed concept, but historically we apply that outwardly, don't we?
Usually, yes.
Like we think of a parent forgiving a teenager who broke curfew or forgiving a friend who betrayed a confidence. It's a transaction between two separate people.
But Maples takes Shakespeare's outward observation and internalizes it. The inner judge desperately needs a seat of grace, too. That twice-blessed dynamic has to happen entirely within your own psyche. You must be both the giver and the receiver.
That feels incredibly abstract, though. I mean, how do you actually facilitate a transaction of mercy with yourself? You can't just shake your own hand and say, all is forgiven.
No, you can't. It requires embracing certain paradoxes of human psychology, which Maples beautifully ties into his concept of the fallout. He's playing on the imagery of the autumn season.
Oh, like the haiku.
Exactly. As we move into the fall, the days grow shorter, the leaves die off, and there is significantly more darkness than daylight.
And I read that section a few times because I was initially really skeptical.
Huh?
Because in psychology, darkness usually represents depression or isolation. But Maples is arguing that this seasonal lack of outward illumination represents a vital period where inward reflection must be prioritized.
Think about it. When the sun is shining brightly, human beings are naturally drawn outward into the external world. We become highly active, we chase external achievements, and we constantly compare ourselves to others in the bright, revealing light of day.
Yep.
But when the darkness creeps in, both literally in the changing of seasons and metaphorically in our darkest hours of guilt, we are forced inside. The external distractions fade away, leaving us entirely alone with our conscience.
It makes me think of standing in the middle of a massive football stadium at night.
How so?
Well, if all the glaring artificial stadium lights are turned on, you can't see anything past the bleachers. The light is blinding, and it drowns out everything else in the sky. But the moment someone cuts power to those lights, and you embrace the quiet darkness, the subtle, profound beauty of the stars suddenly appears. You need the darkness to see the depth.
That's a great analogy.
So Maples is arguing that stepping away from glaring outward judgment, those artificial blinding lights of societal expectation, is actually required to find self-compassion.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he links this necessary inward reflection to the Beatitudes, specifically Matthew 5.7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Jesus' parables frequently cut through our human desire for rigid opposites to create cohesion and grace. The human brain naturally wants to categorize complex situations into binary black and white terms like, I am a total success or I am a complete failure.
We resort to the sledgehammer on the marble again because nuance requires too much cognitive effort.
Exactly. Mercy is the ultimate antidote to that rigid binary judgment. It introduces the gray area where true psychological and moral growth actually happens. And there's a profound secondary effect, too.
What's that?
When you nurture that empathy inwardly, it naturally restores your ability to nurture relationships outwardly.
Yeah.
If you demand flawless perfection from yourself, you will inevitably demand that same flawless perfection from your neighbor or your spouse.
That is so true.
But when you disarm the hostile judge internally and genuinely see yourself as a work in progress, you automatically begin giving others that same grace.
Okay, understanding this philosophy is great, but how do you actually do it? If you're listening to this and you're at square one with self-compassion and your hostile inner critic is screaming at you from the moment you wake up, how do you start?
Maples doesn't just leave this as an abstract thought experiment. He concludes his reflection with a very specific, actionable daily exercise. He refers to it as harvesting the seed of mercy.
Okay, the daily garden exercise.
Right. The instruction is to act deliberately, like a gardener. You must consciously choose to plant a flower and pick a weed each day. And he leaves the reader with a guiding question to ponder. How long will it take you to build a garden bountiful with mercy?
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's tailor this specifically for someone who's just starting out, someone whose internal garden is currently nothing but weeds and thorns. If I'm trying to build this into a simple morning routine, what does picking a weed actually look like tomorrow morning?
You have to keep it incredibly manageable to avoid overwhelming yourself. When Maples suggests you pick a weed, he means identifying just one hypercritical, shame-inducing thought that day.
Just one.
Just one. Imagine you're brushing your teeth in the morning. You're facing the mirror test, both physically and psychologically, and your brain offers up a thought like, you always mess up your presentations, you are an absolute fraud.
I know that voice well.
We all do. Pulling that weed by its roots means you consciously recognize that thought, not as objective reality, but as the hostile inner judge acting up.
You challenge the binary nature of the thought. You look at the mirror and tell yourself, no, I don't always mess up. I stumbled on one slide yesterday because I was nervous. I'm a work in progress.
Exactly. But pulling the weed leaves an empty hole in the soil of your mind. You cannot leave a cognitive void, or another hostile weed will simply grow back in its place.
So you have to plant the flower.
Yes, you have to actively plant a flower. This means offering yourself one piece of grace or recognition of your effort.
And I think it's important to note, this doesn't need to be like toxic positivity or grandiose self-praise. You don't have to look in the mirror and declare you are the greatest speaker on earth. It just needs to be a grounding truth.
It can be as simple as acknowledging, I am carrying a significant amount of stress right now, and I am doing the best I can to navigate a difficult week. You plant that compassionate thought in the exact space where the hostile criticism used to be. The entire exercise takes maybe 60 seconds.
We are ultimately talking about the compound effect of neuroplasticity here. If you do this daily, you are physically rewiring how your brain responds to the stimuli of failure.
That's the goal. Maples points out that this practice fundamentally alters your emotional resilience over time, because emotional resilience is rarely about never feeling bad or never making mistakes.
Right.
It is measured by how quickly and constructively you can recover from the feeling of failure. When you view yourself as a garden continuously growing, rather than a factory product that has failed a quality assurance test, your relationship with mistakes changes entirely.
Because a garden is never truly finished. You don't look at a tomato plant in May, see that the tomatoes are still small and green, and decide the entire plant is a failure, so you should just burn the garden down.
Exactly.
You understand? It is just in a specific stage of growth. You water it, you give it time. And Maple suggests this specific mindset allows you to advance confidently in the direction of your dreams, even while carrying the weight of your imperfections.
The hostile inner judge attempts to convince you that your imperfections disqualify you from advancing. It demands flawlessness before you're allowed to take the next step.
But mercy intervenes.
Yes, mercy intervenes and says, you are flawed, you have made mistakes, you have caused harm, and you are still entirely worthy of growing into something better. It gives you permission to keep walking.
So just to wrap up this whole journey, we started this conversation looking at that crushing, isolating weight of guilt staring up at the ceiling. And through Dr. Maple's work, we see that guilt isn't a malfunction. It's a vital evolutionary feature of our moral conscience.
It's the fail-safe proving we actually know the difference between right and wrong.
Right. The danger only arises when we allow that healthy conscience to mutate into a hostile inner critic that paralyzes us with demands for immediate perfection. Breaking that paralysis requires stepping into the inward fall light.
We must step away from the glaring expectations of perfection, using that quieter, reflective space to practice self-mercy.
Because true self-assessment requires the psychological safety of grace, not the threat of hostility. By practicing that daily garden exercise, picking one weed of harsh criticism and planting one flower of grace, we slowly disarm the inner judge and rebuild our emotional resilience.
You don't have to have the entire block of marble figured out today. The most important step you can take is simply choosing to begin the work. Mercy is just the tool that gives you permission to pick up the chisel and keep sculpting.
I love that. So as you go about your day, think about that heavy feeling of shame we began with. If your hostile inner judge was permanently silenced today, what new, terrifyingly beautiful work in progress would you finally give yourself permission to start sculpting tomorrow?